ask, this is a feeling question. So when you hear the word Oregon, what do you feel? And maybe why? Alexander?
Well, I mean, Oregon was once a lot bigger than what it is.
A little closer, thanks.
Oregon was once a lot bigger than it is now, you know, over 100, 200 years ago, as a political construct or territorial construct. So when I think of Oregon today, I think of just a screwed up system, to be honest. I mean, again, the last election, you know, where you had somebody who doesn't want to pay his taxes throwing lots of money on one political branch or one political party, and then you have a political party that is in office who has lots of money to throw at their candidate. And what do I think of when I think of Oregon? I think
what do you
Oregon
feel?
itself.
I want to ask what you feel. I'm asking
What
because
do
I
I
think you're
feel
talking a lot about
Oregon?
feeling.
I mean, I have a romantic image of, you know, Tom McCaw trying to fight for, you know, the land use laws and stuff like that, but at the same time, I see it as a failure. It was a failure almost right after it was established. I mean, that whole 1970s hippie, leftist, progressive Republican worldview that we were trying to push, which was, you know, open beaches and stuff like that, has been really a failure because it was undermined immediately by the timber industry and stuff. So
Okay.
Oregon, to me, is really kind of sad.
Okay.
So I hate to say that. I hate to say that feeling about it, but it is.
It's interesting that you both feel it and you say you hate to say that.
Yeah, I guess I hate to say it because I grew up here.
Okay. Yeah. Carina, can I ask you? You want to go to Matt? Yeah.
Well, I have similar feelings to Alexander. I also grew up here. I was born in Oregon. I've lived all 45 of my 47 years of my life. I've lived in Oregon. It feels like home to me. I have a nostalgia for the Oregon that I grew up in. It's a beautiful state and it's a diverse state, and it's it's got this independent spirit and this problem-solving, in innovative ways, not afraid to think outside the box, and that's the part of Oregon that I love and that I have this nostalgia for. Over the last couple decades, though, that's changed, and Oregon has become much more kind of progressive and left-leaning, and it is changing, and I think the way we feel about Oregon, or even just the perception of Oregon from other people, is different than what it was 35 years ago when I was growing up.
It's interesting. It sounds like a shared feeling for somewhat different reasons, but a similar feeling.
I would say it definitely feels like shuffling a deck of cards, and every card is something different, and I feel the anger I feel when I go to the legislature and have to deal with Republicans and Democrats. I feel the way it feels in spring when you're digging roots when my great-grandma was here. I feel what it feels like when the Columbia is splashing you when you get too close. I feel all of the beautiful things and the painful things. And I think maybe sometimes we say the things that we don't like about Oregon because we do love it and we do love the ideas that it could be. I mean, one of the cards on that deck is that I do feel like Oregon being progressive, she flies with her own wings, that there was a huge opportunity on the table for carbon markets and ethnic studies curriculum for Oregon to really be a catalyst for those things as those things were being created globally. And so there's opportunities here in the way that our state is broken up by labor and natural resources and progressive values, and the way we can move and navigate if, Democrats could push more statewide and maybe open up non-affiliated voters to everyone. But there's things we can do to be more inclusive to all Oregonians and to start making that path, from where I live to the city of values and economic development, and really just being realistic with our forestry practices, all these sort of things. So all of it, I'll flip it in a deck.
Okay, at least 52 feelings.
Yeah.
I think I want to push back from that to something, Alexander, that I read in an interview of yours from, I want to say, at least a few, maybe several years ago, and it was around it was when you were developing the Doug flag.
Yeah, the Cascadian flag. Yeah.
The Cascadian flag to really help people conceive of what the idea of Cascadia is.
Right.
And it seemed like what you were trying to do was change consciousness.
Yes, 100%, yes.
I love that you just said yes, 100% yes to changing consciousness. So, is there any part of that would, because I'm thinking about Matt sitting right next to you, who's trying to change the literal border through legislation that 2 states and the federal government would have to vote on. Did Cascadia ever carry, or does it carry, that kind of aspiration?
Repeat that
The
one.
aspiration to change the political borders to align with the change of consciousness you're seeking around it.
Well, I think once you get into that consciousness that you are connected, interconnected with everything around you, with the forest and stuff like that, those political borders dissolve. They really, literally dissolve. It's like, what's the point of having a political border? Because the birds, the moss doesn't care. You know, it's really about, again, going back to water. It's that flow of energy that really is the most. I know that sounds very hippie-ish, but in some ways it is hippie-ish. I mean, as horrible as that term is, but I mean, it's a deep mysticism about it, about the land.
Which then, I mean, what I hear you saying is, why even change the political borders? It's more that the political borders recede in importance.
Exactly, they dissolve. Because you're one with Mother Earth, and that's everything. If you're not one with Mother Earth, then you're really basically a colonialist. You're consuming.
Okay.
I mean, even though by nature we eat, but in this case, you are a cancer on the planet. You're sucking everything away. So that flag is to create this consciousness that we are one with this planet. And it's not just that flag. I mean, I've created other bioregional flags as well. And my goal was to get people to be, wherever you're living, be conscious of your space. So.
I actually think that's an interesting way of looking at things, Alexander. Our geography does affect us. It affects the way we make our living. It affects how we live our lives. And in Oregon, there is 2 very distinct geographies. The west side of the Cascades is a different geography, a different climate than the east side of the Cascades. And so, to understand that is by itself going to create different groups of people and different people that see things differently is an interesting thought, because that is certainly part of it. Part of the reason why people in Eastern Oregon identify with Idaho and the politics of Idaho and the values of Idaho is because Eastern Oregon counties look like Idaho. If you look at the satellite map, which you said you had rolling, it looks like Idaho. If you were drawing borders today, you would not put the border on the Snake River where it currently is. You would probably try to group the similar geography, similar peoples in the Willamette Valley, and then group the Eastern Oregon high desert climate folks with other high desert climate.
What's the question?
Well, I think I think Matt was responding to Alexander talking about geography as a way to think about borders.
I think, I mean, obviously, before Oregon was even a state, tribal people were more aligned with the Cascadia region and really following water flows in the environment, things like that, and settling in places that were more common sense and were economically beneficial. The Warm Springs people were placed on our reservation because it wasn't farmable land. It was rocky and forest, and so we were actually intentionally placed there because during that time with all the land allotments and all these sort of things happening, there wasn't a lot of value. But fortunately for us, there was value in the timber. And so I think, looking at the way, or understanding a tiny bit about bioregions that I do, I look at the restoration projects that the tribe has done. And so initially, a lot of the streams and those sort of things were just straight cut for logs to be able to go down them for the logging companies and that sort of thing. But on the time I got to spend on council, we participated in a lot of land management things where we actually put streams back to their original flows because it was better across the board for the riparian zones, for the habitats, for the species, all those sort of things. So it's interesting to me, again, to say that I feel like, Oregon, we gotta be realistic, that our policy was really about economic development and extraction of natural resources, not protection of it. And we show that in how we have literally recarved the landscape to serve our economic values. But now, when you talk about all these borders, you have your irrigation districts, you have your water issues. Are we really answering to actually the water and the flow of nature? No, we're answering to economics. Once again, how much water can we give to farmers? How much can we put into these reservoirs? How much can the earth possibly handle that we push to its breaking point? Is that really what Oregon's about? I don't think that's what we want it to be about, but that's what it has become, you know? And so it's hard because it is the way it is now, and as a tribe who have senior water rights, we have to work with our irrigation district all the time, and there just isn't the water. So what is the answer? I wish it could be that political boundaries dissolve and we actually use all our funding to just deal with the real solutions, but, you know, politics.
Unfortunately, I don't think they're just going to dissolve either. I mean, it's hopeful thinking, but we live in a time of, this is a very anthropocentric time. We are human-centered, and we can't, but this is why I designed the flag, was to create that consciousness so we can help dissolve it. Now, maybe if everybody started taking mushrooms, I haven't taken mushrooms myself, but you know, maybe that dissolving of ego would help. But right now, we're not doing it because as we get more scared, we go more into ego. I mean, this is not to get into psychology and stuff, but as we go into more, as we get more scared, we get into group identity, nationalism. I hate to say it, states. You know, my area versus your area. And it's not going to help anything. It's going to make it worse, unfortunately, because we're not really dealing with the big issue, which is climate change. Just everything.
So it's interesting how in a very short span of time we've talked about, well, a little bit about possibly moving one state border and dissolving political borders altogether, and you used the phrase, we've got to be realistic. And it's interesting to think, and it makes me want to actually ask each of you, like when you think, like, I want to be as realistic as I can about what we can hope for, I guess I want to ask, like, why, to what extent does it make sense to think about changing a border? To what extent is it more, what can we do within the borders as they are?
Policy-wise, that the state could have made these changes in policy in the last 7 years, but they haven't. What they've said is the tribe has to meter these houses and tax that water in order to qualify for these. But when we were on council, we would fight with our elders because basically to them, when we signed our treaties, when we were relocated, there was these solid things that would redefine us as human beings, as Indian people, if we were to kind of change who we were. And charging our people for chush, charging our people to literally just have access to water is one of those things. So on one side, you had a handful of us younger ones who understood the reality that our people were going to go without clean water for years if we didn't just put a $5 flat fee that we weren't going to enforce. But our elders understood that that meant the last pieces of our soul we've been able to maintain with that boot on our neck all of these decades. So we never did it, and to this day we still have breaks. We still have to deal with our water situation and have to go get our water from places and boil it and do all these sort of things. We still have an over $200 million need for the water system. We're still trying to deal with these things. So this is a perfect example of us maintaining really strong tribal values, but coming up against the reality. So what do we do? What do we do? Do we charge our people, or do we wait for the state to beg? You know, because that boot is going to be on our neck from every angle, from the peer, from our local reps, from our state reps, from our federal reps. We're on our own. So I don't know what I don't know, you know, what the answers are, but there's the problem.
And what you said at the start was that you want the focus to be very much on how within the existing arrangement do we make the change rather than Alexander.
For me, changing borders is like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. It's like, okay, great, we rearranged the chairs to be in a different order, but we're still headed towards the iceberg. So we need to start really questioning deeper issues. Again, I would say with the Oregon, the east versus west divide, maybe you should be looking at the political structure that we have in the first place. Does it represent everybody? Is there an issue of money as being the big problem with the system? And you know, this inequity within that money system. So yeah, I'm not in favor of rearranging deck chairs.
So deck chairs back your way. I mean, I think we know your answer more clearly on this.
I think they could use some rearranging. I think borders are are imaginary lines that are a tool to make people's lives better, and they should be serving people. We shouldn't be causing problems and causing political tension because of where an imaginary line was placed 164 years ago. We should use that as a tool to group similar peoples, get people matched to government and policy that they want and that makes sense for their communities, and lower political tension. So realistically, I got involved with the Greater Idaho movement because as a lifelong Oregonian, I know the urban-rural divide. I know the political tension that comes from that, and it's a solution. Moving the border would be a solution that would do away with that urban-rural divide and that political tension and make people's lives better.
So it's interesting. I guess I'm going to move us toward questions, and as a way of doing that, I want to give you a second to think about, as you've listened to the other two people you've been up here with, whether a question is coming to mind for you, either within you or for either of the other people up here. I do want to say it's interesting, and I'm probably overstepping my role a little bit, but I guess I feel like tension is healthy and desirable. And so, especially in political contexts. And I worry if the goal is something like homogeneity or unanimity. As someone raised within the borders of a country that tries to be democratic, it's especially when we try to do away with tension that I start to get most nervous. So again, I think I'm overstepping my role, and maybe what I'm doing is trying to model the question that's most popping up for me as we move toward questions from the audience. But I want to, having said that, and I think it's a question, how confident am I about doing away with tension as a political goal? It actually makes me quite nervous, so I'm thinking a lot about that and what I hope is a useful way. Can I ask, has a question emerged for you as we...
Not a question so much as when I've listened to Carina talk, and clearly what's happened, what happened with Native Americans was awful, and the history is long and ugly and not good. But it's an example also of where there is a strong community there. There is a community that is its own community, and it is different and it's diverse, and it's not the same as Western Oregon, it's not the same as Eastern Oregon. You're your own community, and you deserve to have the self-determination to organize that community the best way that you can. And I've heard, when you are talking about these frustrations with the state and with the Democratic Party and with the Republican Party and all these things, it makes me think you guys need more autonomy. You need more ability to go outside of these other structures, and you know how to set up your community the best for your community. And that's essentially what we're talking about. When we're talking about moving borders and grouping similar peoples, it's that there are communities that are different from each other, and that's okay, and that's good. And they see the world differently, and they want different things for their communities, and they know best how they want to set up their communities. And we need to give them the space, the political power to set those communities up the way that makes sense for them.
Thanks, Matt. Alexander, a question that, as we've been talking for the last
Well,
hour...
it's not so much a question, but just an observation that if you base your political borders on the current political structures, we've seen those structures shift radically. Oregon used to have two progressive Republican governors. That was Tom McCaw and Hatfield before that. And they were the ones that pushed the land use laws, which we would today count as liberal left. And yet that movement was also very much rural, not urban. Urban people didn't really want those land use laws. They liked doing, subdivisions and stuff like that. And it was the rural communities that tried to stop huge subdivisions and destruction of farmland and stuff like that. So I would caution to have anything based on a political structure, because those are very fickle things. The Democratic Party is now really the war party. They're supporting a war in Eastern Europe, whereas the Republican Party is now the peace party. I mean, it just shows you how fast this stuff shifts. And to base anything on this artificial construct is really, I think, a very dangerous thing to do for borders.
Let's go to, I want to go to Carina.
That went
You go
fast.
back. Yeah.
Well, I think, I will say, geez, we're talking about politics. The boot on my neck, it's Democratic and Republican, and so we could have spent a whole nother hour talking about those things specifically, but I think what I will say is that, as far as detention goes, someone recently said I should tell people when I start to talk, I'm going to punch you in the face and you're going to like it. And it's true. I think I obviously live in Central Oregon. Again, all of my representatives are Republicans. I constantly have to engage with conservative people who are racist, who say racist things, who say things that are white supremacist narratives, and I have to understand where they're coming from and why they are, have those things ingrained in them, and I have to speak to them in a way that shows them I'm intelligent and I deserve to be there and these sort of things. But also, if I'm going to sit down at a table with you and I'm going to have to do all this stuff, we're going to lock arms and we're going to talk about that racism. We're going to talk about boarding schools. We're going to talk about assimilation policy. We're going to talk about sterilization. We're going to talk about immigrant rights in ICE. We're going to talk about Black exclusionary laws and Chinese exclusionary laws, because all of those things are a part of who we are. And those of us that benefit the most from it, from this state, need to be the ones who really understand it. So, I think there's importance in the tension, and I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not letting anyone else go anywhere, because it's important for us to have these conversations if we want to move on. The tension is good.
So, Matt, I know you had, and you may be holding a comment. What I want to do is I want to actually shift us to questions from people in the room. And so, as we switch to that, I do want to say, following what you just said about tension, that I think there was some uncertainty about what this evening was going to be. Not just from people coming, but my guess is also from the three of you. What the hell did we agree to walk into? And I want to say I appreciate that all of you have been game to engage with each other this evening.